Hey everyone. Today we've got an awesome interview for you as part of our exclusive content series for the XRP Army group on global ID. Today I have the pleasure of having Seth from TaxBit. He's the Director of Government Relations. Seth, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. So, I've been with TaxBit for, gosh, it feels like forever now, but a couple years in the making. And I am a CPA by trade, so I've worked in tax for most of my career. And so I do all of our government relations work. So I interface with the IRS and Treasury departments on a regular basis, as well as with members on Capitol Hill. And then on top of that, I also run our subject matter expert team. So, we're a team of CPAs and attorneys who deal with the more technical clients as well as working directly with our enterprise clients, so exchanges and broker dealers.
Awesome. Great to have you know, an actual tax expert with us this year. I feel tax season this year must have been a bit crazy, especially with what we saw early in the year with crypto prices. So we figured it would be a great time to just go over some of the basics, in terms of how the IRS treats crypto, the differences between taxable events and non-taxable events, and maybe later on we can talk about some methods for potentially optimizing our tax bill at the end of the year.
Yeah,
So let's
absolutely.
just get started, Seth. You know, a lot of us in the industry and in the crypto space, we like to talk about crypto as a currency, but clearly the IRS treats it a little differently. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so going back, gosh, to 2014, that was the first time the IRS ever actually addressed cryptocurrency. And the first thing that they did is they came out and said that cryptocurrency is not a currency like USD or euro, but that it is property. And so then they basically said, since it's property, we're going to put it in this box, and all these rules that already exist are going to apply. And of course, the challenge with that is that cryptocurrency does not perform like normal everyday property, and there's very interesting things that happen with it. And so there was almost a 5 year gap of time between when they came out with that first initial guidance in 2014 until 2019, when they issued some additional guidance which touched on airdrops and hard forks. But again, a lot of that guidance has been pretty lacking. And so, to the basics though, it's property. And there's definitely differences in how forex or currencies would be treated, but we're primarily in the property world.
um Being a non-tax expert myself, maybe the best way to sort of explain what that actually means is to talk about how taxes actually apply, right? Like, when do taxes apply, when do taxes not apply when you're dealing with a property, for instance, buying and selling, etc.
Yeah. So really, you look at what you initially buy something. So you exchange USD and you buy Bitcoin, and that initial price that you pay that establishes a cost basis. And then you hold it for a period of time, and then you sell, and you either make a gain or loss. And so whatever you sell it for, you can subtract out that cost basis, and then you can either have short term or long term based on whether you held it for a year or longer, or a year or less. And so there are different rates that apply if you hold it for a longer period of time. But in general, it's the capital gain rules. So, you always get to subtract what you paid
Right.
for it. And then you get beneficial rates for if you've held it for longer than a year.
So I guess in that sense, not so different maybe from trading or holding stocks, right? You have the same sort of capital gains tax formulas to apply.
You're exactly right. I mean, securities is really what we kind of point to most often for the analogy. What's interesting though is that when you look at securities, securities have like very specific rules. And without jumping into
Mm,
the rabbit hole, one that we hear about a lot, and this
yeah.
will actually go down. We'll talk about this a little bit later about tax optimization, but for securities, they have what they call the wash sale rules. Which means that if you sell something and then buy it back within 30 days, they basically disallow that loss that you had generated. But for crypto, crypto is property again.
Hmm.
They don't have those same rules. And so, it's interesting because we do point to securities as an example, but there's even differences between securities and
Yeah.
crypto.
Understood. Yeah, I think one situation where a lot of users maybe get concerned or confused, particularly with the narratives around crypto, is for instance when they might spend it to buy something, or even convert it into another cryptocurrency, right? And because intuitively those might not seem like they're sort of tax events, but apparently there are some things that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah, yeah. So you have to look at what triggers a taxable event, right? So if I'm selling my
Yeah.
crypto for fiat or USD, that's a taxable event. If I'm trading my Bitcoin for Ethereum, that's also a taxable event. And then spending is becoming a much bigger thing now. We've got crypto debit cards and things like that. And so because it's property, every single time you swipe your card, even if it's for a $3 coffee, that's a taxable event, and you have to track that and calculate the gain and loss on that $3 sell of Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever crypto you're disposing of. So, when you're really looking at it, there's going to USD, that's taxable. Going, from coin to coin, that's a taxable event, and then spending it is also a taxable event. And then the other one is, more related to like when you're staking and earning rewards or receiving airdrops. That's also another taxable event. So yeah, the IRS is pretty thorough about
Wow.
trying to tax everything possible.
It seems like it. What might be some examples of, say, non-taxable events?
Yeah, so obviously, just buying that is not a taxable event. Buying and holding is not taxable. But really, once you get past that, any
Yeah.
movement typically is going to be taxable. However, if you end up and when I say movement, conversion is really what I mean. So any conversion from your Bitcoin to something else, whether that's currency or another crypto. But you also have the ability to do some other cool things where for instance, if you want to give a gift to somebody, you can actually transfer your crypto to somebody, and that's not a taxable event. And in fact, you can even
Hmm.
transfer your cost basis and holding period to whoever you're gifting to, which means that they might get something where when they sell it later, they get to deduct what you paid for it, so they don't have to recognize as big of a gain or loss. The other really cool one is donating to charitable organizations. This is one where, similar to stocks, if you donate something that you've held for more than a year, you can actually deduct the full fair market value on your tax return. And so that means that if you've had something that's appreciated really high and you've held it for longer than a year, you don't pay any taxes on that, and you get to deduct the full value. So that's another really great way to minimize some of your taxes and also do good in the world.
You mentioned some other types of transactions, for instance, such as staking or airdrops. What about a lot of these new cards that now offer rewards in crypto? How would that be taxed?
Yeah, great question. We've actually had some really interesting conversations. In my world, I have direct access to some incredible resources in the IRS, and so oftentimes when our clients who are these exchanges who are offering some of these reward programs, they're asking us, well, what should we do? And so we get direct access to the IRS, and while I'll call it unofficial because unless it's written in law, you can't really look to it as evidence, but we do, we can rely on it pretty heavily. It's just like any other reward. So, for instance, if you're getting paid, you're using a Sky Miles reward card and you get paid out in Sky Miles, you're not taxed on those Sky Miles when you go use it. The way the IRS sees that is it's really a rebate or a discount on what
Hmm.
you've already paid. And so when you get paid out in crypto with your crypto rewards card, really your fair market value will be recorded on the date it's deposited into your account. And so then after you sell it or convert it to something else in the future, you can deduct whatever that fair value was. So it's a pretty cool program, right? Because you're getting crypto, you're
Yeah.
not having to pay for it, and it's not taxable until you dispose of it later.
Cool. I'm sure a lot of our users will be pleased to hear that. But clearly, like you said, basically, once you get past that buying phase, you are now sort of meandering in this jungle of taxes, and I suppose that's sort of where you guys, the tax experts, come in. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the sort of methods that we can employ to maybe minimize our tax bill at the end of the year?
Yeah, so typically, what you would see in, securities world, right? If you're on, TD Ameritrade website, typically when you're going to dispose of something, you have kind of like, you have your default method, and then you have the ability to kind of specifically select what you're selling. And that works a little bit easier in the securities world because every security has an identification number, and it's very easy to identify. Whereas in crypto, it's fungible, right? If you have 3 Bitcoin and you bought it in small increments over a long period of time, and it's hard to know exactly which one that is. And so what we look to is using kind of a method that is automated. So for most of our customers, we use what we call HIFO by exchange. And so this is really where we're looking at, you're selecting at the beginning to dispose of whatever the highest cost basis item is first. Because if you sell the highest cost basis item first, that means that your gain is going to be minimized or your losses maximized. And so the idea is to be able to sell those first. And then after that, we kind of prioritize more long-term disposals as opposed to short-term because you have more beneficial rates. But it really kind of depends on what your strategy is. Like, if you're making, money on other, capital gain transactions like your stock portfolio, and you want to be able to use losses from your crypto, maybe you maximizing your losses is your strategy on crypto. And so, that's where we kind of come into tax loss harvesting as an option. But yeah, typically what we've seen is most people elect to go with this HIFO methodology.
And well, I guess maybe this is sort of a good segue to talk a bit about your platform, right, where you said a lot of this can be automated.
Yeah, so if you come on, so just really quick, TaxBit, we kind of do, we have 4 different market verticals that we play in. The first thing that we started out with was, having a consumer tool. And so really this is where you can come into our platform, you can connect all of your exchanges and wallets where you trade, and we'll aggregate all the data, we'll run all the calculations and fill out the tax forms. Now that experience is like a one-time thing, right? And that's more of like how TurboTax does it. You only go into TurboTax once a year. And for us, we really wanted to be able to shift from being a tool to being a platform, something that you would go to on the regular basis to be able to, look at what your tax consequences are before you make a trade. And so we developed tools for, our tax optimizer, where you can actually go in and see by every single lot that you've purchased what the potential gain or loss is, and we'll actually make recommendations where you can potentially, harvest losses and buy back into a position, or minimize the gain if you're looking just to, for liquidity. So, the idea is we want to be able to have you come into our platform on the regular, so that you are always, tax is a major part of investing, and I think that a lot of people in the crypto space have kind of just put it off in the back of their head because they just don't want to think about it because it's been pretty complicated at this point. But for a savvy investment strategy, tax is always an important thing to consider before you make a trade.
This idea that you could utilize a platform to better inform you throughout the year, I think, I mean, it applied to me personally a few times where um there were maybe these trading opportunities, but you're thinking, oh man, like the tax implications of switching from one crypto to another, and then you just end up getting cold feet. It's like, I'm not even gonna get into that, right? But like you said, trading is about more than just trading. It's also about the tax optimization part. So
Yeah, and one thing, I kind of mentioned it earlier about the wash sell rules. Typically in securities, if you have Apple stock and you're in a loss position and you decide to sell it, and then you buy it back within 30 days, then it's as if you never sold it and you don't get to recognize that loss. But that doesn't happen in the crypto space, which means that we all know crypto can be pretty volatile, even from day to day. And so,
Sure.
our goal is to be able to give you the visibility to know when you're in a position where, hey, if I sell right now, I can recognize, a $5,000 loss, but then I can buy back into my position immediately, which means that now I have, a loss that I can take against other income that I've got. Or, I can, yeah, so it's just a great strategy to be able to minimize. Now, what I will say is that this is one of those things that the IRS has not addressed yet. We know it doesn't apply for
Right.
certain as written, but we're certain that they will probably attempt to regulate it at some point. And so this may not be a strategy that you can employ forever. And so again, it's an important one to try to take advantage of while it's a little bit in the, I won't even call it the gray area. We know it doesn't apply, but the
Right.
IRS will try to look at how to change it in the future.
Well, I appreciate the tip. I would say on that topic, right? As you said, things are in this sort of fluid state. The regulators are still trying to grapple around, what this thing is and maybe where it's going, how to deal with it. As someone on the government relations side, how are those conversations going? What is their framework for thinking about this stuff? And is there maybe room to get to a place where um I guess some of the usability issues are addressed, for instance, just like spending stuff and having all these tax complications involved.
Yeah, so I think that there's several things that are kind of on the docket. I've seen in proposed legislation something called a de minimis rule, and this is something that you see in typical foreign currency transactions, where the idea would be if you have a gain that's less than $200, then it wouldn't be taxable. So that would mean that if you're just going out and buying coffee, that clearly is going to be under $200 unless you're buying for the entire office. But the idea is that you would be able to make small purchases and not have to worry about the tax consequences. The downside and kind of the part that they don't talk about is you still have to track all of those purchases to know what cost basis has been disposed of, so you know what cost basis is available for your other transactions. So there's still a major tracking. The other part is I talked about how in 2019 they came out with some rules about hard forks and airdrops. Well, I've heard internal discussion about feeling like they may not have really hit the nail on the head with what their guidance was. They kind of feel like it was not what they came out with had unintended consequences. And staking is a great example. What I've heard is right now the current rule is that if you have a staking reward that's paid out to you, you get taxed as just regular income the minute that it's deposited to you or that it's available to you. Now, what I've heard a lot of is, some people in the IRS have compared it to farming. So, and not yield farming, I'm talking like literal farming in the dirt, planting seeds, growing crops, okay? Yeah. And so the idea is that you plant a seed and then it ends up
Uh-oh.
growing and you have a crop that's now viable. You're not taxed on that when it's grown, you're taxed on it when you end up selling it. And so the analogy is that if I have this staking reward, so I basically used my property to create more property, that is not taxable when I receive it, but it's taxable when I dispose of it later. And so I think that there's definitely some discussion internally in the IRS and Treasury departments about how do we, is that the direction that we should go? Is that better? And if not, what should we do about it? So, that would be great, because we know, especially on the airdrop side, right? How often have people been airdrop coins that had, a higher market value and then it just tanks, right? Is it fair for you to have to pay tax on that higher market value, even though you never actually realized any real value out of it? And so that's the problem they're trying to address, is how to work with that. And then the other part that I think you'll see here probably within the next 6 months is additional guidance for exchanges and broker dealers about what they need to report. We've seen historically, starting with Coinbase, companies that reported a 1099K. And, a 1099K is really meant for a payment processor like PayPal. Somebody who you've got a store and you're processing all these payments, and PayPal will then report all of that those gross transactions to the IRS. It never applied to cryptocurrency, like at all. In fact, it caused way more issues because what happens is they expect that line from 1099K to show up on a Schedule C, self-employment income. But a lot of people who trade crypto, they're not self-employed. They reported it on their 8949 as they should. But the problem is the IRS looks at both of those and they see a disconnect and say, oh, you didn't fill this out. We're going to send you a notice. And if you ignore the notice, you get sent to tax court, and then you're paying attorneys and CPAs to try to defend you. And it's ridiculous. So long story to say that there's going to be additional guidance to the two exchanges to tell them, like, hey, 1099B, which is used to report both gross proceeds and cost basis, really is the form that ought to be used. Or they may actually come out with their own 1099, like a 1099 crypto, something that's specific for cryptocurrency.
Well, I guess the big takeaway is that they are paying attention now, and that can be good. Getting more clarity, for instance, around some of these forms, and there are downsides too as they figure things out along the way. But I've seen some of the headlines right from the Biden administration. They're taking the IRS, they're taking taxes very seriously, as we all should. Um, that's doesn't need to be said, obviously. um but obviously, these days, and because we're dealing in the world of digital, we do have the benefit of a lot of these platforms to help us out with it now. So Seth, I want to thank you for all the great information you've provided us today. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
No, just if you guys have any questions on taxes, we one of the things that sets TaxBit apart, honestly, is that we have an incredible support team. These guys, our support escalations ends up going up to our SME team, which are CPAs and attorneys. We really understand this space, and we understand that taxes can be a scary thing for the consumer. And so, our goal is to make it as easy as possible. And so, come over to TaxBit if you have any questions. We'd love to earn your business and, take that burden of the tax reporting off your shoulders so you can actually just focus on what you enjoy doing, which is trading in crypto.
That's great. Thank you, Seth. We really appreciate your time coming on here, providing some knowledge. We'd love to have you again down the line, if you're up for it.
Perfect.
And yeah, great. Thank you. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Seth.